The sun was low in the sky as Jace Morgan rode back to his ranch after a long cattle drive. The land was dry, the air thick with dust, and his horse was tired. It had been a hard journey across the plains, but Jace had grown used to it over the years. Life as a cowboy was lonely, but it was what he knew best. He preferred the quiet of his ranch to the noisy towns where people always seemed to be in a hurry. As he neared the barn, something seemed off. The wooden doors of the stable were cracked open, and Jace could hear soft breathing coming from inside. At first he thought it might be an animal that had gotten in, but the sound was too steady to be a critter. His hand instinctively went to the rifle slung over his shoulder, but he held back. He wasn't one to jump into trouble, but he wasn't stupid either. Jace's years on the open range had taught him to trust his instincts. He slid off his horse and approached the barn cautiously. The stable smelled of hay and fresh leather, the usual scent of his work. His boots creaked on the wooden floor as he stepped inside. There, on one of the hay bales, lay a woman. She was asleep, her face peaceful, framed by long, dark hair. She wore clothes unlike anyone Jace had ever seen. Her clothing was simple but beautiful, woven beads and intricate leatherwork that clearly marked her as a member of an Apache tribe. Jace stood still for a moment, his mind racing. What was she doing here? He had never seen her before. She was too young to be an outlaw, and he had no reason to think she was a threat. Still, he couldn't ignore the possibility. After all, the Apache had their own ways, and it wasn't uncommon for tension between the tribes and settlers to lead to violence. But something about her calmed Jace's nerves. She didn't seem like a danger. In fact, she seemed lost, out of place, like she had nowhere else to go. Jace's mind was a whirlwind of questions, but he didn't move. He didn't want to startle her. Instead, he watched her for a while, noticing the delicate patterns on her clothes and the calmness on her face. She was just a girl, maybe not much older than his sister back home in Texas, and she had an aura of weariness around her that spoke of hardship. He decided to wait. He didn't want to make any sudden moves and risk angering her or scaring her away. He leaned against the stable's doorframe and waited for her to wake up. As the sun dipped lower, the air grew cooler and the light inside the barn softened to a warm, golden hue. The woman shifted slightly in her sleep but didn't wake. Jace, still standing there, couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity mixed with concern. What had brought her here? What was she running from? It wasn't until the first stars began to appear in the sky that the woman stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open and her dark eyes met his gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Jace was unsure what to say, unsure if she would even speak to him. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice soft but firm. The woman blinked as though she wasn't sure where she was at first. Then slowly she sat up on the hay bale and rubbed her eyes. Her face was pale, her clothes dirty from travel. She looked exhausted, like she had been walking for days. "I'm Aylin," she said, her voice quiet but steady. I am lost." Jace's expression softened, and he could see that she wasn't lying. There was no malice in her voice, no hint of trickery. She was simply someone who had ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Lost, huh?" Jace repeated, glancing out the stable door toward the vast, empty plains that stretched for miles. "This ain't a place you want to be lost in." Aylin looked down at the floor, her hands trembling slightly. "I had to run. From my people. From what's happening, I don't know where to go." Jace furrowed his brow. She was Apache, that much was clear. But what had she meant by "from my people"? Was she in trouble? Had she escaped something dangerous? He took a step closer, careful not to make any sudden movements. "You got a place to stay?" he asked. "You need food?" "Water?" She shook her head. "I don't know where I'm supposed to go next. I've been running for so long." Jace studied her for a moment. He had known hardship in his life, but this was different. This woman wasn't asking for trouble. She was asking for help. "Well, you're welcome to stay the night," he said. "I'll get you some water and food. Tomorrow we'll figure something out." Aylin looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and weariness. "Thank you," she whispered. Jace nodded. "Don't mention it. You're safe here for now." He stepped out of the stable and went to the small cabin that stood beside it where he kept supplies. As he gathered water and some of the dried meat he had from the cattle drive, Jace found his thoughts drifting back to Aylin. There was something about her that intrigued him. She wasn't like any of the people he had known in his life. She was quiet, guarded, and yet there was a strength in her, a kind of resilience that spoke to him in ways he couldn't explain. When he returned, Aylin was still sitting on the hay bale, though now she had wrapped a worn blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes followed him as he walked back into the barn with a jug of water and a piece of dried beef. Jace set them down in front of her, then stepped back. "You can have as much as you need," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "I know you're hungry." Aylin hesitated for a moment before taking a sip of water, then a small bite of the beef. She didn't speak at first, but Jace could tell she was grateful for the kindness. After a while, Aylin spoke again. "What will you do with me? When I've rested?" Jace looked down, thinking. "I don't know, but right now, you'll stay here. I can't just let you wander off into the night. Not like this." Aylin nodded slowly as though she understood. She didn't argue. There was something about the way she carried herself, as though she had learned to accept her fate, whatever it might be. For the rest of the evening, they didn't speak much. Jace kept to his corner of the barn, mending some of his gear while Aylin rested, but every now and then their eyes would meet, and there was an unspoken understanding between them. She was here, in his stable, seeking refuge from a world she didn't want to be a part of, and Jace, for reasons he couldn't explain, found himself willing to help her, no questions asked. As the night deepened and the stars shone brightly overhead, Jace finally settled down on a pile of straw in the corner of the stable. He closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come easy. His mind kept returning to the strange woman he had found in his barn. Little did he know that this night would be the beginning of something he hadn't expected. Something that would change both of their lives forever. The days that followed seemed to blur together in a haze of hard work and quiet conversations. Jace and Aylin spent most of their time fixing up the barn, caring for the horses, and gathering supplies. They didn't talk much at first, but there was an understanding between them, an unspoken bond that grew stronger with each passing day. Aylin's presence in Jace's life was a quiet kind of comfort, though he wasn't quite sure what to make of it yet. The cowboy had always been a loner. He had built his life on independence and solitude, but there was something about Aylin that made him feel less alone. Her calm demeanor and quiet strength intrigued him. She worked hard, learned quickly, and never complained. She was different from anyone he had met before, more than just a survivor. There was a depth to her, a wisdom in her eyes that Jace couldn't fully understand. As the days turned to weeks, Jace began to notice things about Aylin, small things that spoke volumes. She never spoke much about her past, but when she did, it was clear that she had seen more violence and suffering than anyone should have to endure. She had told him little pieces about her life, a family lost in raids, a tribe torn apart by settlers, and a long journey to find peace. It was clear that Aylin had been running, not just from the violence, but from the weight of a world that had never shown her kindness. One afternoon, after spending hours tending to the cattle, Jace returned to the ranch just as the sun was beginning to set. He saw Aylin standing near the edge of the field, her silhouette framed by the warm light of the setting sun. There was something about the way she stood, strong, grounded, yet somehow distant. It was as if she was caught between two worlds, unable to find a place to truly belong. Jace walked over to her, the ground crunching beneath his boots. "You all right?" he asked, his voice steady but full of concern. Aylin turned to him, her expression unreadable. She nodded slowly, but Jace could see the sadness in her eyes. "I'm just thinking," she said softly. "About what?" Aylin hesitated for a moment before speaking. "About what comes next. I've been running for so long, Jace, I don't know where to go from here." Jace felt a tightness in his chest at her words. He couldn't imagine the kind of pain she had lived through. It made him want to protect her, to make her life easier, even though he knew it was impossible to erase the past. "Well, you're safe here," Jace said, his voice quieter now. "You don't have to worry about tomorrow. Just take it one day at a time." Aylin looked at him, her gaze softening for a moment. "I don't know what to do with that," she said. "I'm not used to being safe. I've been on my own for too long." Jace understood. He had never had to fight as hard for survival as she had, but he knew what it was like to be alone in the world, to face challenges that seemed impossible. But he also knew that sometimes having someone beside you made all the difference. "You don't have to be alone anymore," Jace said, the words surprising him as they left his mouth. He wasn't sure what had made him say it, but in that moment he knew it was true. Aylin didn't answer right away, but the look in her eyes told him she understood. They stood there together, silent as the sun dipped below the horizon. For the first time since she had arrived at his ranch, Jace felt like he wasn't just offering her a place to stay. He was offering her something more, something that neither of them had dared to hope for, a future. Over the following days, their bond grew deeper. Jace found himself thinking about Aylin more than he cared to admit. He noticed the way she laughed when they shared stories of their pasts, how she would smile when she was proud of something she had done. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was about living, and Jace was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, Aylin was the missing piece he had been searching for. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The land around them was still wild, and the tension between settlers and tribes hadn't disappeared. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the cabin, the sound of hooves echoed through the distance. Jace's eyes narrowed. It wasn't the familiar rhythm of his own horses. This was something else, something more dangerous. He stood up quickly, instinctively reaching for his rifle. "Stay inside," he told Aylin, his voice urgent, but Aylin didn't move. She stood her ground, her eyes sharp. "I'm not staying inside. I've lived through worse." Jace looked at her for a moment, surprised by her courage. He didn't argue. Instead, he motioned for her to follow him, and the two of them moved toward the barn, staying hidden in the shadows. As they reached the barn, the riders came into view, 4 men on horseback, all wearing the telltale signs of outlaws. They were coming for the cattle, no doubt about it. Jace's hand tightened around his rifle. The outlaws hadn't seen them yet, but it wouldn't be long before they did. "We have to act fast," Jace said, his voice low. "Stay close." Aylin nodded, her expression serious. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. In the days she had spent with Jace, she had learned a lot. Not just about surviving in the wilderness, but about trusting someone else, about working together to face the challenges that came their way. The two of them moved quietly, setting a trap for the outlaws. Jace used the terrain to their advantage, positioning himself and Aylin where the riders would least expect it. It was a tense few minutes as they waited, their hearts pounding in their chests. Then, without warning, the first outlaw crossed into view. Jace took a deep breath and fired, the sharp sound of the shot echoing through the air. The outlaw fell from his horse, stunned but alive. The others immediately turned, drawing their weapons, but they were too slow. Jace and Aylin worked together, moving with the precision of two people who had learned to trust each other completely. In a matter of minutes, the outlaws were disarmed and captured. They had underestimated Jace and Aylin. She had been every bit as resourceful and brave as he had hoped. As they stood over the outlaws, Jace couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what they had accomplished together. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting for something worth protecting. When the danger had passed, Jace turned to Aylin, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You were pretty good back there," he said. Aylin smirked, her eyes twinkling. "I learned from the best," she replied, her voice full of quiet pride. The two of them made their way back to the cabin, the tension of the fight fading into the distance. As they sat down by the fire that night, Jace realized that something had changed between them. They weren't just two people caught up in a world of chaos. They were partners. They were a team. And in that moment, as the fire crackled and the stars shone above, Jace knew that no matter what the future held, he would face it with Aylin by his side. Together, they had found something stronger than survival. They had found a new kind of family,